there's something I wanted to discuss, which is the idea that in order to be a Norse pagan, you automatically have to follow the path of Asatru, or to be an Asatruan, which is wrong. It's just wrong. I mean, I find Asatru a very valid expression of Norse paganism. I do. The Aesir were a very, very important part of it. They are the gods of civilization, of human interaction. And that is what society is based on. Human interaction. Give and take. And Asatru today carries a stigma to it of right-wing extremism and political nationalism. Now, I don't want to get into that. I am sure that there is something to the whole blood and soil, and I have experienced that myself as a foreigner in this country. There is an inner knowing that I am not from here. I'm a stranger on strange lands. Even if I would speak perfect Italian, I would always be very keenly aware of the fact that I am a foreigner here. That's not to say that I don't want to be here, that I don't like being here. I do. Or that I am unwelcome here. I am not unwelcome here. I have never experienced that. But I would like to point out for those people that have that reluctance towards Norse paganism, even though they feel the pull to it, that there is more to it than just the Aesir. You have a whole other faction of gods. For instance, the Vanir, obviously. Now, the Vanir are gods. And the Aesir thought of them as lesser than them. They didn't like each other and they fought. They had wars. There was a lot of tribalism within the Norse Pantheon. But the Vanir are basically fertility gods. It was Freya, who is a Vanir, who taught Seder, which is magic, to Odin, from which Odin eventually discovered the runes and gave them to us. So yes, they might have fought, but they also learned from each other. There was push and pull, but also give and take. It's much more complex than this black and white idea like, oh, they were only enemies. No, that's not true. There was cooperation between them too. But without needing to go into all the details, there are even gods in the Norse Pantheon that do not belong to a faction. Ullr, Loki. Loki is perhaps the best example there. He was half Aesir and half Jotun. And the Aesir didn't trust him. The only reason why Loki was welcome in Asgard was because he had Odin's protection. Because he and Odin were blood brothers. They had a blood tie. That is how he became half Aesir. But he was also half Jotun. And there are more gods, but those are probably the best examples, without making it too complicated for a 10-minute video. I find Asatru a very valid expression of Norse paganism. I don't see anything wrong with it, and I find that stigma of being at a politicized movement, which, yeah, you can look at it in that way, but you shouldn't take it as the focal point of the whole movement. Asatru was formed by people who had a deep longing towards their ancestral roots and wanted to go back to it. And I find nothing wrong with that at all. On the contrary, I find it good that they felt that pull. They should feel that pull. And if they do feel that pull, they should explore it. But the worship of the Aesir, which is where the word Asatru comes from, really wasn't the end all be all of Norse paganism. For instance, if you were a farmer and you lived very close to nature, you would probably be more inclined to worship the Vanir as gods of fertility. You have a farm, you want your animals to reproduce, you want your crops to reproduce and be plentiful and bountiful, to feed yourself and your family, make some wealth from selling the surplus. That was considered a good thing and a virtuous thing to do, to accrue wealth. Now, the difference between the Aesir and the Vanir is relatively simple in that is that the Aesir were the gods of society and the Vanir were the gods of nature, more wild, more feral. So, if you lived close to nature, of course you would worship the Vanir over the Aesir. You were not in society. That doesn't mean that you reject either or. But there is something called Vanatru, and that is specifically the worship and the veneration of the Vanir. So this criticism of if I want to get into the Norse paganism, I have to be Asatru, it's just wrong and it's untrue. It's much more complex than that. The gods weren't black and white. Yes, they fought, they did, but they also got along at other points. There was push and pull, but there was also give and take, exemplified in Freya teaching Seder to Odin. And that's really all I wanted to say about the subject. I don't think that I can get much more into it right now without making this video very long, because there's a lot of examples. There's a lot of nuance to it all. It's not black and white. This whole mythology, this whole spiritual expression is not dual like Abrahamic religions. There's overlap. There are lots of gray areas. And that's just what I wanted to touch upon, or at least bring up and mention. That Asatru is just one expression of Norse paganism, and in my opinion, a very valid one, but not the only one.